Recently, the Old Hunters released for Bloodborne. The Old Hunters was a much anticipated DLC expansion pack, the first and reportedly only expansion pack that Bloodborne will be receiving. And I've had quite a bit of time on, hands-on with this expansion pack. I got it on the day it launched, on last Tuesday, and my God. This, I say with absolutely no hyperbole, no exaggeration, this is the hardest content, any expansion pack, or just in any content in any game I've ever played. And it just kicked my ass from start to finish. Like, I got good at the Old Hunters, I got good at fighting the enemies, but I still got my ass handed to me. So this is going to be a kind of like a sort of review. It's not going to be a full-on, review, but I'm just going to go through the things that I liked and disliked, and just give you my general impressions after finally completing everything in it. It took me over a week to do, just because how frigging tricky it was. So, first off, things that I like. It starts off with the story. Old Hunters is very much like the rest of Bloodborne and a lot of other From Software games where you've got to discover the story for yourself. But when you do, again, it is really, really interesting stuff. In fact, it was really fascinating trying to find out some of the information. And some of the little small tidbits that you get about just some very minor characters that you run into are really interesting, and they flesh out the world of Bloodborne again. And you meet some characters that have been mentioned in the main game, such as Ludwig. It's no secret, everyone knows that Ludwig is like the first boss you fight, so that is pretty cool. You get to meet him. You can even talk with him a bit after you defeat him, and depending on what you're wearing can affect how the conversation goes, so that's very interesting. Lady Maria, of the Astral Clock Tower, the kind of like the main hunter boss fight of the expansion. Again, really interesting lore-wise, and she has a striking similarity to someone who you're very familiar with. I won't divulge who that is, but any keen-eyed Bloodborne player might have noticed that she looks very similar to someone who you'll be very familiar with in Bloodborne. So, in terms of story, it's interesting stuff. It's really good lore, and the actual narrative that you yourself go through, going through the Hunter's Dreams, the Hunter's Nightmare, seeking out the source of the nightmare, the secrets that it holds. It's just, it's an interesting yarn from start to finish. But it makes it really difficult to unlock some of the lore, though. It can be really tricky. And another thing I really enjoy about it is the characters that you meet. I don't really know what the name of the hunter you encounter, who is pretty much the only hunter who's got his sanity left, but I'm pretty certain that he's the character called Simon, the person who has the bow blade, because he wears harrowed garb, which is apparently the garb of essentially church spies, and he gives you Simon's bowblade. So it's not too difficult to stretch to imagine that he is actually the Simon. You encounter some rather horrible people as well, like the church assassin and Ludwig, Maria. So the characters that you meet are really interesting. Now, one of the main additions to it, of course, with any From Software game, I think when they release a new add-on, a lot of people ask what weapons are they going to add. And Old Hunters didn't fail to deliver. It delivered a lot of really interesting, cool weaponry. As you can see on the screen, the Moonlight Sword. It has returned. Now, I've never really played much Dark Souls. It always keeps kicking my ass more than Bloodborne does. But I do know of the Moonlight Blade, and I know that it's a fan favourite weapon that's appeared throughout a lot of From's games. I'm not sure about the Adventures of Cookie and Cream, but if I remember the title correctly, but I don't know if it appears in that game or not. But the Moonlight Sword has appeared in a lot of From Software's games, and it's just nice to see it return. Plus, it is really, really powerful, and it's nice to have a weapon that complements a strength arcane build, because it requires a decent amount of arcane to wield effectively, and obviously being a two-handed weapon requires strength. Some other really interesting weapons I liked. I haven't really used the Whirligig Saw a lot. I know lots of people love that weapon, so I'll give it a shout out. Apparently that's been getting a lot of use. People really like the Whirligig Saw. I love the fact that it's actually called the Whirligig Saw. I thought it was just someone calling it that because, it's a whirligig, it whirls. No, it's actually called that, so yeah, awesome. I know some of the weapons I really enjoy. As difficult as it was to get, I mean, like, stupidly difficult. The Rokoyo is the weapon used by Maria, and it's a really cool weapon. It's kind of like a take on the another take on the Blade of Mercy, in that it's a sword, more of a long sword in its original form, but when you split it in half, obviously it's a sword and a dagger, and it's very similar to the Blade of Mercy, except it doesn't have an element on it. It doesn't have any arcane bolt or fire on it, so it can be imbued with fire paper or gems and stuff. So that gives it that extra utility. But also some of its attacks are just nasty. If you want to be a twirling sword, saber-wielding badass, you can be now. And I've been seeing that weapon get a lot of use as well, and I've been enjoying it myself. But no, my personal favourite weapon of the expansion so far has been the Beast Hunter's Scythe. I forget how you pronounce it. It's not how you normally spell scythe. It's spelled S-A-I-F. Safe, but that sounds a bit silly. I think it's the old-fashioned way of spelling scythe. And it is essentially the burial blade if it had sex with a sword cleaver, because it's got the handle of a sword cleaver and essentially the trick weapon transformation of a sword cleaver, except it's a Blade of Mercy blade on the end of it. Sort of. It's a bit chunkier, but no, I really like the weapon. It's really good for getting quick. You know, when it's in its normal form, it's like a big long-bladed scythe. Essentially, it acts like a sword. And when it's in its trick form, it's kind of, this is like the inversion. This kind of screwed my mind up a bit at first. It's the inversion of the sword cleaver. That when it's in its trick form, that's when it's in its short form. And yeah, it's really good for closing distance between hunters, getting quick hits in, and also just the animations of it look so cool. So weapons-wise, it's been really, really, really good. And some of the range weapons you get as well. I'm quite fond of the piercing rifle, because it's just good for getting that bit of extra long-range damage. I can do the same level of damage I'm doing with my Evelyn, but it's slightly longer range. But I would not use it for staggering. It's really slow firing and slow recovery as well. As well as the Gatling gun's been introduced. That's a fun weapon to use, from what I've heard, and it's a fun alternative to the cannon, because you can get. I've been testing it myself. You can get a lot of shots out with just for the amount of Quicksilver bullets it uses per like second or so of firing. You don't really use up too many, so I can see that being a very good weapon in the right hands. Now, next, I want to talk about the environments. The new environments you go to are all really cool. They're mostly new locations. I know the Hunter's Nightmare section of Yharnam is essentially just the Cathedral Ward and a few other sections mashed together. But I think one of the best descriptions I've heard for it is it's not a dream version of it. It's more like it's been badly remembered by someone. I can remember Varti Video saying that. It's more like it's been badly remembered. Like, they can remember what the structures look like, but they can't remember where they were. And the sections that can't be remembered are just kind of like just clumps of mud with like swirly patterns all over them. I really enjoy the research hall, essentially the cathedral, the healing church's research lab. It's Frankenstein lab inside the clock tower. That big central landmark of Yharnam that you always saw but never got to go to, you can finally go to inside the Hunter's Nightmare, and it's a pretty sweet location to go to. Just some really annoying enemies inside. But my personal favourite location has got to be the fishing hamlet, because it is from what I can tell, it's directly inspired from the H.P. Lovecraft novel Shadow over Innsmouth. And because from what I can remember correctly, of Shadow over Innsmouth, there's a detective who goes to a town, and it is basically, he discovers that they worship a giant fish monster, and that people are slowly turning into horrible, weird fish monsters. And so it just kind of reminds me of that. It's kind of like going to Innsmouth after the fact, after it's all gone down. And plus, it's just a nice, creepy location. Yeah, it gave me flashbacks to games like Medieval. Very nice to see. Now, again, like I'd said in my top 5 Bloodborne bosses video, the main reason why lots of people come to a game like Bloodborne will be the boss fights. And for the most part, the old hunters didn't fail to deliver, but whoever designed these boss fights, he really must have had it in for the player. Because these fights, my god. Well, let's just put it like this. I couldn't beat Ludwig on my own. I had to have co-op help. We slaughtered him like in 5 minutes with co-op help. On my own, it took like 20 tries to even get close to killing him. And then he kicked my ass. And after that, the Living Nightmares being the second boss, they were annoying. They took me a few tries, but I managed to beat them on my own. But they're not the best designed boss. It's just kill a certain amount of enemies who are all linked by a certain health bar, and avoid their big I'm going to kill you in one hit move when they summon in a load of stars on you. It's not the best boss fight. But Maria, oh wow, it took a lot of tries, and that's including with co-op help. She was stupidly difficult. Now I know I shouldn't have gone into this expansion pack at the beginning of a new game plus, but my character's like really high level. You know, he's really tough. He's got pretty much mostly. Well, not mostly, but most of my primary weapons that I use are fully upgraded. So, you know, I'm not exactly shirking in that department. And Maria still gave me freaking loads of trouble. The fact that she just took barely any damage from me, and when I finally managed to beat her, me and 2 other players took her on, and one of us ended up dying. I nearly ended up dying, and yeah, the other person ran out of quicksilver bullets. So yeah. Whilst an awesome location and awesome music, she was really difficult, and I mean like really, really difficult. And some of the moves she has felt a bit cheap. Other than that, a cool boss fight, but it just felt a bit cheap. Next is the next boss fight that is, you know, on the difficulty scale, is Lawrence, the so many times mentioned but never seen Lawrence. In fact, we thought we'd seen him in the Chalice dungeons. Boy, were we wrong. He was a pushover there compared to this boss fight. Because Lawrence the First Vicar, yeah, they managed to make a cleric beast tougher than Ebriatus. I don't know how they do that, but yeah, I had more trouble with Lawrence than I did with Ebriatus. But I did manage to eventually beat him, and yeah, that was satisfying as all hell. But yeah, Lawrence, you were a tough bastard. And really, really annoying. In fact, when I went up against the cleric beast on the game afterwards, I was freaking not terrified of it, but I was apprehensive just because it's like, yeah, I've been having my ass handed to me by a cleric beast for the past few days. So that leaves the last boss fight. I'm not going to go too much into spoilers, but Orphan. Orphan was just. How do you describe Orphan? Well, fucking next to impossible is how I describe Orphan. That's all I'm going to say. I nearly had a heart attack when I beat the guy, and that was only because I managed to get a lucky pistol shot in that got that last chunk of health off of him. So, yeah. But now we're going to get into the stuff that I thought they could have done better, or I found just annoying in the expansion. First off, I'm just going to say, whilst it's a good-sized expansion pack, it's about 15 hours long. That's not extended by difficulty. I'd say if you add on difficulty and amount of time you're trying bosses and stuff, I'd say about 20 hours. But the fact that it's the only expansion pack that we're receiving for Bloodborne, I almost said Bloodborne then. The fact that it's the only expansion pack we're receiving for Bloodborne, it's kind of doesn't feel long enough knowing that. If we'd been getting a second expansion pack after this that was a similar length, boom, I'd have been happy. There'd been 2 expansion packs for like what? It would have been about £30 here, and you'd have got just about under 10 hours of what amount of content the main game would have had. That would have been perfect. Nice big extra chunk of content, but unfortunately it's the only content the game's got as an expansion in any way, and it's just kind of really disappointing that, because I would love to explore the world of Bloodborne more outside of the probable sequel that's going to come, because this game did quite well. I would just like to have seen a bit more. Like there's like 3 expansions for Dark Souls 2, so it would just be nice to see Bloodborne get a bit more of the expansion pack love. But what we got was good, it's just I wish there was more. Now, as I was previously mentioning in the bosses, you might have heard me use the word cheap a few times. Yeah, these bosses are quite cheap. Like they're mechanically they're all right, I guess, some of them, but some of them have moves or attacks or just movement patterns that are just so annoying to avoid. Best example is, like I just mentioned earlier on, Lawrence. The reason why he is more annoying than Ebriatus, the reason why he's more difficult than Ebriatus, is because you got a lot less space to fight him than you did even the cleric beast. And that was on a thin bridge, and surprisingly, cutting his legs off makes him more mobile. Weirdly. But also, you give a cleric beast with decent ground pound attacks, and then you add a fire AoE to that. Even with fire resistant gear, he was kicking my ass. And as you see on the screen, bloody Orphan, this boss fight, I kid you not, it took me 4 days of constant trying to beat this guy. It would just get to the point where I'd turn the game off in frustration and be pissed off, and then I'd just have to go back to like 10 minutes later, because I'm like that. If it beats me, I just can't let it rest. I've got to do it. So for 4 days I was trying. And yeah, he is a nuisance. He is, because in terms of like location and like music and design, he's awesome, but just in terms of moves, attacks, his actual attack strength as well. And then when he gets into his second form, he is next to impossible to stagger because he's so erratic. He's hard to hit with bullets, and he has a lightning bolt attack that can one-shot you if you're standing in the wrong place. You have to run around the arena to avoid it, and yeah, just the bosses felt a bit, because I know there's fewer bosses this time around, so you got to make them count more. You want people to really feel like beating these few bosses, but it shouldn't get to the point where it took me like 5 tries on Maria with co-op help. So that's one of the things that annoyed me about it. And on top of that though as well, just some of the normal enemies are ridiculously overpowered. Now, a lot of them I can deal with, I can learn their attack patterns easy enough, but it's like the fish giants. Why do you have to fight 2 of them to get the Rokoyo? I had to like cheese them and use a Shaman Bone Blade to get one to kill the other. Like, you could say, oh, they want you to use tactics, but it's just like, that was lucky getting the Shaman Bone Blade hit in, you know? So yeah, this could have really toned down the difficulty of some of the enemies. I mean, if one of those fish giants grabs a hold of you and starts eating you, it's pretty much a guaranteed insta-kill. So yeah, rather annoying. So yeah, there's that. So another thing as well is, as cool as the locations are, I wish they'd been like maybe a bit more, or maybe there's been more to find in them. Or on top of that, maybe more Chalice Dungeon locations, because there is no new Chalice Dungeon things. I understand that they might have added a few weapons and stuff you can find in the Chalice Dungeons from random chests and things like that, but new enemies from the expansion pack, or just brand new enemies completely for the Chalice Dungeons. Maybe just a new Chalice with a whole new set of enemies and bosses. Just something to expand on that, because I love the Chalice Dungeons. They're really good fun. Once you start getting into them, they're quite addictive. And it's just a shame you don't really get any of that in the expansion pack. Just new Chalice Dungeon templates or designs. Like, I'd have loved to have gone to a Chalice Dungeon which was something similar to the Fishing Hamlet, or maybe a swampy underground ruin or something like that. Just new Chalice Dungeon stuff would have been cool. I love the Chalice Dungeons. So yeah, that's my impressions anyway of my sort of review. It's really good as the old Hunters, but it's just I wish there was a few things they could have done to improve it, just to make it just a little bit better. Because it's great, but it could have been excellent. And whilst I really like it, it wasn't as good as the main game. So that's my 2 cents. I really enjoyed it. I was glad I bought it, but I just wish they might have just toned a few things down.